Welcome to The Voice of Retail for the week of April 15th, 2019. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada and sponsored by StreamCommerce, North America's fastest growing Shopify Plus agency. Learn more at streamcommerce.com. In this episode, an exclusive feature interview with Marc Miller, Toronto native, founder of the Legacy Lab and Chief Strategic Officer at Team One, which is Publicis Group's premium brand agency, and most importantly, co-author of Legacy in the Making, recently anointed in Forbes magazine as one of the top 10 business books for 2018. Next up, an interview with Retail Council of Canada's Quebec President Marc Fortin as we chat about the state of the retail nation in Quebec and explore the top issues facing retailers in Canada's second largest retail market. Last but not least, I'll cover off the top retail news of the week, including Metro's foray into reusable containers and Uber Eats, MEC building on its experiential history, tip-top new store concept and reinvention expansion, Bed Bath & Beyond closing 40 but open 15, and Best Buy thrives through an e-commerce revolution. But first, let's listen now to my interview with Marc Miller on Legacy in the Making. Marc, welcome to The Voice of Retail. How are you today?
Great. Thank you for having me on the program.
Well, thanks so much for making time. You and I met briefly, and I heard you speak at a Rotman University of Toronto event in Toronto, and I thought, what great insights! And I've had the opportunity to look through your book, Legacy in the Making. So it's a real treat for me to have the opportunity to chat with you a little bit about some of the insights from that book. So why don't we start out? Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a Canadian Toronto native, currently, I think, in the City of Angels, Los Angeles. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Team One and what you do today.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada. I grew up in North York. And I thought there were a couple of pieces about my past that would be germane to your audience. The first is not only did I grow up in Toronto, but I actually grew up in and around the retail environment. And more specifically, my dad founded what was at the time one of Canada's largest bridal wear stores called Windsor Bridals, which was located down at Queen and Spadina when I was growing up. Yeah. And so I used to help out there on the weekends. So as a young man, to see a bride shopping for wedding gowns really had a lasting impact on my future relationships. I think I learned and I became wiser for the experience and have a beautiful wife and a beautiful daughter and a happy marriage as a consequence of all that I learned. But more immediately, when it came to the subject of business, I sort of got a mini education from my dad in that experience and what it meant to do things like rent space, employ staff, order and pay for inventory, pay salaries on a weekly, monthly, and annual basis. Mm. And so I thought that was a useful thing to sort of bring up from my background, in addition to the reality that my mom and dad raised my brother, sister, and I in what I would sort of characterize as a sort of fiscally conservative working class family where we were short-term thinkers, where survival was the priority. There was no tomorrow without a today. And I remember when it came time to go to university, my parents asked what I planned to study. And I said, either film school or business school. And I said, well, you should do whatever you want as long as you go to business school. and it really came from that point of view of do the responsible thing to make it through. We didn't know a lot of people who pursued creative paths back then who had long tenured careers. But we'd certainly observed as a family people who went down the business path and were able to sustain themselves over time. So I graduated from the Schulich School of Business at York University in Toronto, Canada. Started out working at a small Canadian national ad agency. Ended up going to the Toronto branch of a large U.S. ad agency called Leo Burnett, and was ultimately recruited to come down to the United States, Los Angeles. I've been here since just before the turning of the year 2000. I work inside of an agency called Team One, which is a very large communications company. It's part of the Publicis group of agencies. We tend to focus on luxury brands and premium brands. And inside of Team One, in and around 2012, I created a practice called the Legacy Lab, which is sort of the hub of information that fed the book, which is principally about leaders and brands that aren't just doing things to make it through a short-term world with short-term strategy, but the long-term thinkers in a short-term world.
Let's talk about this book. It's a fantastic read. I love both the introduction and the content and the stories that kind of back up the narrative. I mean, words that jump out at me, as you say, about short-termism, but then a legacy that instead of looking backward, that builds it forward. I thought that was a really great insight. Tell us a little bit more about the book. It's available across the nation, but tell us a little bit about when it came out and what the input. You've talked about the impetus behind the book, but tell us a little bit more about it.
There were a few things that were happening concurrently that inspired me to do the research. And as I've shared, I believe when you came to Rotman, this never started out with how do we write a book. It started out with how do we explore a business curiosity that was on my mind, and as it turned out, on the minds of many leaders of many brands in many categories. Immediately, one of the business challenges that I was wrestling with in my job was some work being done for a top-tier luxury automotive maker that was coming up at the time on the 25th anniversary and wasn't sure how to make sense of its time, place, and history. They felt that Mercedes and BMW, long-standing brands, had wonderful platforms to tell their story over time. But as a 25-year-old brand, really what platform did they have to talk about their success? They were concerned the others would say, when you get to be our age is when you should talk about it.
Right.
And it's totally different than a top-tier luxury hotel brand we were working on, which is getting ready to turn 30 years old at the time, that felt it was far better to be the brand new something, the brand new Cosmopolitan Hotel, than the 30-year-old brand that they were. And yet both very successful and didn't know how to make sense of their time, place, and history. Equally, Team One, the agency that I was working at, was coming up on its 25th anniversary at the time, and was thinking about how to be a successful communications company in a modern context. And a bit more close to home, or a lot more close to home, I was about to become a dad for the first time. And so I was beginning to think about, despite the fact, or in addition to the fact that I spend so many hours at work and care so much about career, sort of to what end beyond a financial imperative. And the confluence of those elements got me asking questions about time, place, history. When did it matter? When didn't it matter? And one of the conclusions that we drew out of the research was to make it in a short-term world. To make today count, you actually had to be looking further ahead. That long-term thinkers actually did better in a short-term world, and the short-term thinkers sometimes made it through, but sometimes did not.
So it's such an interesting approach. I mean, I think of as you talk, I reflect on retailers that you and I would know that are hundreds of years old, but that doesn't guarantee them any legacy whatsoever, or the legacy is not worth value without a forward-looking business model. Tell us about how business leaders, retailers can carve out that opportunity to approach long-term thinking in what is a fairly short-term word. I mean, you bring up some great stats in the book about the things like the CMO average lifespan is now 3.5 years, and 20% of businesses fail in the first year, and only 33% make it to 10. So it seems like the impetus is we need to be successful quickly, and as you say, it's hard to focus on this long term. Tell us a little bit about what's your advice about how to carve out opportunity for that approach?
Sure. You talked about some of the facts in the book. There's another one that I quite like, which is in the 1920s, the average lifespan of a company on the S&P 500 was 67 years, whereas today it's only 15 years. And beyond looking at the stats in a historical context, if you just look at contemporary business activity, 2017 and 18 were rough years. Toys R Us, Gibson Guitars, Radio Shack, Sears, and a number of others all file for bankruptcy. And so the reason I think that's important is more than just idealistic research or sort of emotionally inspiring research. I think there's just a business imperative for leaders to figure out how to build things that last a long time. As I said a moment ago, I think the solution comes not from either looking back or looking forward, but from resolving the paradox, writing history every day. We distilled it into something called the modern legacy mindset, and we sorted out the 5 principles of leaders who are building things that last a long time, whether your brand's 100 years and older, whether your brand's 10 years and younger, or anything in between. And the 5 principles basically go like this. If the short-term thinker typically looks at things like maximizing return on shareholder value, the leaders that we're talking to think about how to take leadership very personally. They think about their contributions before they think about the extraction they will make. Second, or separately, instead of just thinking about building larger empires, more physical bricks and mortar, they think about behaving their beliefs and leading with culture first. Third, instead of just targeting customers, where the brand is on the inside and the customers are on the outside, they think about letting outsiders in, treating customers as co-owners and co-authors. Fourth, instead of just leading in categories, being 1% better, 5% better, they think to play their own game and they lead in culture, not just in category. And finally, they don't just think about their 15 minutes of fame. They think about a lifetime's worth of meaning and significance. In other words, they never stop making legacy.
It's a great framework, and let's talk about three of the retailers featured in your book. And I'm talking about Patagonia Honest and NYX, Yvon Chouinard, Jessica Alba, and Tony Ko. I mean, at the surface, each of them seem to have one important thing in common, and that's each of them set out in their own way to solve a problem that they perceived, right? So Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard talks about, I couldn't find climbing equipment that wasn't disposable. I wanted to build quality climbing equipment. Took the same approach to apparel, and honest company Jessica Alba couldn't find or wanted cleaning products that were safe, and Tony Ko at NYX wanted cosmetics that were approachable and affordable without being the luxury price. So at a surface, each of them have that in common, but it sounds like from your perspective, talk about how they put that model to work, that 5-point model. They've certainly each of them built a legacy.
Absolutely. Patagonia comes up first in the book. In fact, it's very special that Yvon Chouinard wrote the foreword to the book. It's something that we don't always discuss, but it is one of those moments of pride that here he is, a very iconic leader of a brand, well established in his career and success, has written a wonderful book and contributed to other pieces of writing on his own. And he was very moved by the topic of modern legacy making. He felt it was important to him. He specifically requested a copy of the transcript from the interview because he felt we were covering topics he had never covered before. And as a consequence, he was willing and enthusiastic about contributing the foreword. So to have found a topic that was so resonant for a leader I admired was a prideful moment. Mm-hmm. You'd asked about how his brand sort of fits the model. The reason we have him open up is he probably checks off sort of all the values, all the principles of the modern legacy thinker, beginning with the fact that he starts, as you say, with solving a problem. His ambition was to move through the world without leaving a trace behind, to be able to climb and to have the next climber go and experience it like him without leaving damage to the environment. And as you pointed out, he was feeling like those kinds of solutions did not yet exist. One of the things I love best about Yvon is he's unafraid and unapologetic about putting his values and beliefs in front of what his company stands for. So at the end of 2017, start of 2018, when President Trump in the United States took a point of view that maybe national parklands don't deserve or require as much protection, Yvon and Patagonia wrote on their homepage that the president just stole your land. And so if you went to buy a shirt, shorts, Patagonia clothing, the first message you were confronted with was a statement of belief that this company that retails clothing actually believes that there's something more important worth protecting. And whereas you could imagine that would be a risky behavior because it would alienate certainly a good percentage of the population, it had the opposite impact, that those who loved Patagonia loved it even more. And financially speaking, 2018 was the most successful year, I believe, in the company's history. So when they led with what they cared about most and connected with what their customers valued the most, they actually drove incremental value in the business by leading with contribution versus leading with extraction. It's also go ahead.
It wasn't just a statement on their webpage, right? I mean, I think they also took the what was it, $10 million benefit that they received from a tax benefit and donated it to these causes, right? So it wasn't just a phrase on a homepage. I guess that would be just the epitome of living your belief, both financially and morally, really.
Exactly. It was a $10 million tax break. Instead of taking it for the company and distribute it internally, they redistribute to other companies and organizations that believe like they believe, which, as you say, is a perfect example of, so many companies say the right words, but when push comes to shove, how many actually live their beliefs? And this one does. And whereas many, I think, could dismiss it as idealistic, emotional, sounds great, but what's the business impact? This brand proves, is one great example of proving the impact of holding fast to your beliefs and galvanizing a generation of fans, owners and co-authors who believe like you believe and advocate on your behalf.
Interesting. When I think of Honest Company and NYX, both direct, they're both brands, but also direct to consumer brands. They each have done essentially the same thing. Particularly, I think of Honest and Company. What was your experience with that brand?
Sure. So it's funny when you write a book that has legacy in the title, people imagine we're only talking about brands that are 100 years old. And yet, as you wander through the stories, given the principle of making legacy every day, there are younger brands and older brands. Honest is one of those younger brands. It was established in 2012. There were 4 co-founders. The 2 most famous would be Jessica Alba and Christopher Gavigan, but Sean Kane was an important co-founder, and Brian Lee, also a very important co-founder. And this really began when Alba and Gavigan met up at a launch party for a book that he had written at the time called Healthy Child, Healthy World. People had hosted the party. There were a lot of celebrities there. Jessica Alba was 8 months pregnant, and she approached him because she was having an allergic reaction to a product, I believe, a laundry detergent that she was using. And about to become a mom, she was concerned about the chemicals that she would be exposing her children to. And she wanted to know basically a safer, healthier solution. And that's where Gavigan sort of stepped in. She was maybe the dreamer, the designer, the initial problem identifier. Gavigan's the science guy. He had pedigree and experience in the space. And he had a lot of really interesting things to say on the topic about what the brand would believe in once they build it, and the service and function they would provide to their advocates, co-owners, and fans as well. So one of his quotes is he says, when we wrote the mission statement for Honest, we didn't talk about products. Per Jessica, effectively, we talked about creating a healthier, safer, happier lifestyle. Our products are the tools we use to educate, empower, and change behavior. He was basically saying, in year 1, you may know and understand Honest Company as the diaper company. But years into this thing, we're equally a beauty company. And years later, who knows what else we will make functionally. But culturally, everything we do will contribute toward a healthier, safer, happier lifestyle. He talks about your culture being your product.
Lastly, for advice and retailers listening, other than to rush out, drop everything they're doing, rush out and buy a copy of this book, what advice would you give them? How do they frame their mental approach to strategy building best to start thinking about this legacy building in the future tense?
There's a model at the end of chapter 1. It's not a model that we came up with. It's a model that we uncovered while we were doing our research called Ikigai. And it was introduced to us by the founders and leaders of a company called 2-Bit Circus. And what they had talked about is if you want to know, as an aspiring leader of a brand or an actual leader of a brand, if you're working on something that you will stick with for a long time, they apply this Ikigai model, which has sort of 4 questions attached to it. First, are you doing something that you love? Because their point is every business at some point in time will go through a hard spell. You just will. And if you love what you do, you'll work at it and find a way through. And so I think passion, commitment, and love for what you do is important. The second piece of Ikigai is, are you doing something you're good at? Because there are too many people who say, I would love to participate in a category. I'd love to create a product, brand, or service. I have no particular skill or fluency there. So I either need skill or fluency, or I need to have leadership on the team that can make contribution to it. The third, I think, is ultimately, for me, the most important, which is, are you filling the world with something that it needs more of? Because when times go to bad, people look to substitute, switch, and replace. All things being equal, I want more of something for less money. But if you're filling the world with something it needs more of, if you're filling the world abundantly with something that is otherwise in rare supply, you'll make it through good times or bad. The last point is sort of the most intuitive, which is if you do something you love, something you're good at, something you're filling the world with more of, then it should also be something that you can make money at. As you can appreciate, there are plenty of people who would say legacy building for leaders who want to do something a long time, that's for a different kind of person. That's not for me. That's for a person that's already independently wealthy or at a mature stage in their career. But in fact, we talked about Tony Ko briefly from NYX Cosmetics. Tony built her brand and sold it for a reported $500 million to L'Oreal. She didn't do this to not make money. And in fact, Tony would tell you, if you're not in business to make money, you shouldn't be in business. because that money allows you to pay for benefits. It allows you to grow. It allows you to prosper. It allows you to do a lot of wonderful things. So perhaps a long answer to a short question, but I'd ask yourself the statements in Ikigai: doing something you love, something you're good at, something the world needs more of, and therefore something you can make money at.
Well, it's a wonderful book because it not only provides, business books are a dime a dozen that provide case studies, and it's hard sometimes to learn from idiosyncratic case studies. But this book also balances that with this guide and some other background. So thanks so much for joining me today, and thanks, by the way, for your support of Rotman. I'm an alumni, so it's great that you contribute back in that kind of meaningful way and share your insights. So once again, thanks so much for joining me on The Voice of Retail, and I wish you all the best and safe travels.
Thank you very much, Michael.
We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Join me at Store 2019. I'll be delivering a keynote titled From a Place to Buy to the Place to Be: How Bricks Can Counter Clicks by Focusing on Selling Moments versus Simply Peddling Merchandise. I then lead into an incredible panel discussion with 3 industry titans talking about the reinvention and reimagination of Staples Canada. Joining me is David Boone, the CEO, Joe Jackman from Jackman Reinvents, and Dragon Joe Mimran, who will talk about this incredible story and leave you with actionable insights and ideas for your business. Store 2019, we'll see you there.
Marc, welcome to The Voice of Retail. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's been a little bit since you've joined Retail Council of Canada. You're relatively new to Retail Council of Canada. Tell us a bit about yourself, where you were prior to joining RCC, and what your role is in Quebec.
Definitely. So my original background is CPG marketing and strategic planning, as well as consulting. Basically, as a consultant, I've worked with packaged goods company, retailers, and as well as association, restructuring them, helping them be more focused and more profitable. And I've been recruited by the leadership at RCC to head over Quebec. And my objective really here is to build our presence in Quebec, because RCC is new to Quebec in a certain way, and ensuring that our team represents our members on a number of issues with provincial and municipal government, and making sure that we build strong relationship with industry partners and government, as well as excellent communication channels with RCC executives in Ottawa and in every region to make sure we share best practices and what's coming up and what's coming down the pipes.
It's for those who are not aware, there's leadership, retail leadership across the country from RCC on the West Coast, Ottawa, and at the provincial level. And you know what, we often would talk about how your group would bring retail expertise to the province specifically, and then a national perspective. Is that how you see your role in general?
Definitely, because Quebec, that we like it or not, is different in the way that the government here has more power than other provinces, so they do legislate differently. We have a different legal system as well. The base of it is different. It's based on the French legal system versus the English or British legal system. So we have different adaptation and harmonization that needs to be done. So everything that's being done in Ottawa is also being done in Quebec plus. So we bring in a leadership because a lot of new laws actually will be coming out of Quebec and will be after that adapted at the federal government or in other provinces. So we need to make sure that we convey with our leadership in the Maritime, in the Prairies, in BC, in Ottawa, in Toronto, to make sure that we have a good shared learning and shared communication so we can better plan for our members. Because there's nothing that's worse than unplanned surprises for businesses. So you want to be able to plan for and predict what's coming up so you can budget for it and you can manage around it.
It's interesting, your point around laws that start even at the municipality level in provinces, particularly in Quebec, that are then adopted across the country. I think of the plastic bag ban that started in Brossard, that got basically provincial attention and then became, achieved national attention. And it really started either started or galvanized a movement around plastic bags. So that's a good segue. Tell me about what the top issues are in Quebec for retailers today.
Well, we've got a few, and it seems like every year the level kind of increases, and it's getting more complex at every level. Federal, provincial, municipal, and again, the harmonization that's needed legislative-wise is pretty complex. But when we look at some of the core issues for Quebec, for instance, the use of temporary employees, there's a new legislation around that's going to make it more complex for any business to use agencies and employees on a temporary basis to replace people that are, or employees that are sick or that are on vacation. So we're working on that. That's a major concern. A disparity on corporate retirement program. So the Quebec government wanted to make sure that everybody was treated the same. But back in 97 to 2001, with the unions and the businesses, all contracts were negotiated that there would be two levels of contract, one protecting older employees with the older system and one that would start from that point on for new employees. So that's a major concern for unions, for businesses, for government as well. So that's one that we're addressing because it's fairly complex and it's not an easy one, and it's not one that anybody wants to touch because naturally these old system or these old programs will die as people retire and pass away. So in the next 10 years they will be done with. So why stir up the pot? So we're dealing with that for our retail members. Environmental issues, that's across the country. Quebec is no different. I would say that's across the world right now. So those are really popping up at different levels. So eco fees, the management of eco fees, exponentially increasing costs related to the blue box management. So a lot of people don't know, a lot of consumers don't know, but businesses are actually paying for the blue box. So anything you're putting in your blue box, businesses are paying to pick that up, not cities, not municipalities. So, and that's getting quite complex, and the costs are continually increasing, and there's very little, let's say there's little kind of management that needs to be put in place by city to prove their real costs. So it's starting to be a bit of an issue that we're addressing, and we're trying to bring some transparency to the whole management of the blue box. The use of plastic bags, which you mentioned earlier. The issue with plastic bag is that it became a political decision and not an environmental decision, and it started a wildfire of illogical decision that went through the rest of the municipalities, and we're ending up with 4 or 5 inventory of different bags, because Brossard that you mentioned wants 100 micron, Montreal wants 50 micron, Westmount wants 12 micron. It's all over the place. So trying to arm
and that's just on that note, I guess that's one of the things that plastic bags or no plastic bags, it's really problematic to have what you described like a patchwork of legislation, right? So retailers have to carry multiple different types of plastic bags. It's really, that's what introduces the complexity, right? And the cost basically is each municipality kind of doing their own thing. And that's one of the things I'm sure you look out for particularly is these, patchwork of complexities that add up to significant costs. Now, you have a new government, both relatively new government at the provincial level and even in the city of Montreal. So, how are you finding working with the new government?
Well, the new government in Quebec is quite. I think they're more balanced. Like, they are business focused and they will listen to business, but they're also will listen to pressure groups. So, which is it's a nice change. Where the Liberals or the government previous to that kind of forgot their base, forgot businesses, and they went on a left tangent that was unbalanced somewhat. So that was starting to create a lot of issues. And I think we're bringing this back to the middle now with this current government. So, which is quite a nice change. Montreal, is a little challenging. Montreal has always had a closed culture, it's always been hard to work with the city of Montreal, but now probably the level of complexity has increased twofold, but the listening kind of capability has decreased twofold. So it's quite challenging for the city of Montreal. They don't really care for business, and they do talk about business being important in local businesses, but they don't listen to businesses, and they don't seem to care on their impact of the decisions. They've got a one-track mind, and they're going for that blindly, and that's a little challenging. So we're trying to bring some sanity back to the discussion and openness and transparency to the discussions.
So we've talked about everything from labor to the environment. Any other top line issues that you think retailers?
Oh, yeah.
I guess if I had an hour and a half of a conversation, right?
Just about, Mike. But look, because we represent food retailers and distributors across the country, so food is a major one. There's a series of issues coming up from Ottawa that will impact us in Quebec. There's a series of issues as well in Quebec. But just from bottle consignment, which a little bit like the plastic bag, it becomes emotional and not rational. And then you got a group to the right and a group to the left, and we're in the middle.
Explain that one a little bit. What did you say? Bottle consignment?
Yeah. So what's happening in Quebec is, and in other places too, is it was easy to do business with the senders that actually separate paper from glass to plastic, and so they never invested. So the quality of their output was always contaminated or low quality because there was always mix of product in their ballots of products. So China would buy anything. Now they don't buy anything. They don't just buy. They buy nothing from us because there's too much contamination. But since these centers have never invested, and Montreal is probably one of the worst, then they need to invest, and they're not ready to invest. So really now they're challenging. They're saying, okay, we should put a consignment or an amount of 10 cents or 15 cents or 20 cents on every jar or every bottle or every wine bottle. But Quebec is structured differently than, let's say, Ontario, where you have beer store. And traditionally in the past, because they wanted to attract consumer to the beer store, they actually lobbied the government to get those 10, 15 cents consignment on bottle of wines. So people would bring them back to the beer store and buy at the beer store. So beer stores set up a little differently than grocery stores and convenience stores, which we cannot take on all of these bottles from the liquor store and everywhere else. So that's an issue, and it's not going to resolve anything because wine and liquor, and they represent 48% of all the glass in the blue box. Well, what are you going to do with all the rest? Are we going to put a consignment on your Tabasco bottle, your pasta sauce bottle? We're not going to do that. So how do you manage it, right? So the blue box is the way to go. So we're trying to bring a rationale around that. And I mean, cannabis is growing everywhere in Canada. Quebec is very close on cannabis. So there's issue with what we call edibles, which is cannabis-based product that you can eat, like muffins, brownies, or jelly beans, or whatever that might be. So that's another one that we need to understand where the government's going to go with cannabis and edibles, so we can better kind of plan for it too.
And would it be fair to say that the government on the whole is not a fan or supportive of cannabis? I mean, it's legal in the province. They are the exclusive retailers, both online and in stores, but they're looking to move the consumption age up to 21, I believe, and they also have some very limiting legislation around cannabis or marijuana labeled or iconic items, shirts and vape things. So it'd be fair to say the government is not on the whole, while they retail it, not the most supportive in the province. Would that be fair to say?
That would be 100% fair to say. And just moving up the age to 21 was interesting, as you think Quebecers are more open. We've had alcohol and convenience and grocery store for so long, but the population is split with that decision from the government. So half of them are going, well, no, you can't do that. The other half saying, oh, yeah, that's right. Well, it kind of defeats the purpose of draining money out of the organized crime and into the taxpayers kind of system, so we can actually reinvest in education and in other programs. But they are looking at moving that to 21, and so Quebec will become the province with where you can have the most fun to the most boring one pretty soon if they keep going that way.
Well, I don't think that can ever be the case. Let's talk about what is happening that you're working on for retailers in the province. I think we're bringing back Retail Council of Canada, CCCD, is bringing back a conference in the fall. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about that. We the last one we did was in 2017, and in 2019. We took a break in 2018, and we're coming back in 19. It's called DTL for Détail, which is retail in French, Quebec. So DTL Quebec on November 5th, 2019. And the focus will be on customization. Because as we looked around, we said, well, consumer habits are changing so rapidly. Technology are playing such a key role in their life, and they're faced with all kind of options, or a multitude of options, more than ever anyway. And that's taking away consumer fidelity to brand and relationship to the brand. So we decided to focus our DTL Quebec in 2019 on basically customization, and may it be technology, data collection, data security, targeted marketing, building brand awareness, and the following from consumers. So that's the realm we're working with to build up a key lineup of speakers for November 5th, 2019 here in Montreal. So we're pretty excited about that.
Well, we'll have you back on as we get farther down, or a little later in the year, and you can tell us all the folks, all the retailers and industry experts you've lined up. So, I can't think of a better person and a better team that you have in Montreal and Quebec City to represent retailers from coast to coast, whether they're based in Quebec or operate in Quebec. Tell me, or tell us how best to get in touch with you if you're a retailer and want to learn more about what you do for retailers in the province, or perhaps if you're listening and you're not a member, and how you would learn about joining and benefiting from your expertise. How do we get in touch with
definitely. Just you can 2 ways. Call me on my direct line is 514-316-7620. Any members or non-member can call me direct, and we can talk about what we can do for them and how we can help them be better retailers and potentially address issues either created by government or else. Another way to reach out is with emails. So you can reach out to me by writing to me at mfortin, so mfortin, at cccd-rcc.org. So those are 2 great ways to reach out to me.
Well, fantastic, and I'll put that in the show notes as well for anyone listening. Marc, thanks so much for your time. You're a busy fellow with lots of balls to juggle and lots of issues to handle. But like I said, I can't think of anyone better for you with you and your team doing it in the province of Quebec. And I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you very, very much, Michael, and see you soon.
Well, all right. Thanks again to Marc for joining me for this episode. Now let's jump right into the top retail news of the week, starting with Metro. A couple of stories here on Metro. First of all, they released some good results. Check that out in the local paper. The sales were up and had a good quarter. And they also announced that they're going to start permitting reusable containers in some departments. So great move there by Metro. Really spot on from a trend perspective around sustainability and allowing customers to bring in reusable containers to fill up in certain departments. They're also expanding their Uber Eats partnership as they, this one from Strategy Magazine, that was from CTV article or CTV video to check out. And all of these things can be found in the companion piece to the Voice of Retail podcast, which is Retail This Week, which is an e-newsletter, biggest e-newsletter, weekly e-news in Canada. Put that together each and every week. That's a free e-newsletter. You can subscribe to that on retailcouncil.org. Anyway, so as I was saying, Metro expands Uber Eats partnership. So A great way to expand the ready-to-eat categories, and we've talked about it before in the podcast around this word grocerant, where grocery stores and restaurants come together and provide solutions for meals in all kinds of different formats. So those are a couple of examples of that. Speaking of shopping bags, we didn't just speak of shopping bags, but I'm going to speak of them now. This from CBC, why retailers' shoplifting fears are wrapped up in reusable bags. So, for all those great things that plastic reduction does, one of those unintended consequences, so to speak, is it does mean you have a lot of people walking through stores with bags in their hands. And that, just means that retailers have to be a little more aware of the people walking in with a bag, because they can be at risk, or they can be a bit of a threat of shoplifting. Reusable bags, they look around, and it just raises some attention, and so something to keep an eye on. That from CBC. Mac, who just opened a new flagship store, we covered that recently, last week actually, talking about their new flagship store in Toronto, and really this from Strategy Magazine, talking about on their Queen Street store, really pushing the boundaries in terms of it being an experiential store, and lots of examples of that. So getting some great meetings and great pictures of this in Strategy, but if you went to Toronto Life or Retail Insider, you see some great articles on the new Mech store. Tip Top, Tip Top Tailors is reinventing itself. This is from Retail Insider. Craig Patterson's great daily e-news, featuring 2 digital walls, running content. It's really a very interesting reinvention and expansion. So light wood accents. It's a lot of conversation around, and you'll hear more about it. You heard Tony Chapman just talking about a store where Staples needed to take some bold moves and reinvent themselves, and you can clearly see Tip Top doing the same thing. Article here from CBC, Canada's inflation rate rises 1.9%. Some of that's driven by actually food prices. Fresh vegetables rising 15.7% in the past year, and fresh fruit prices up as much 8.6%. So we're really starting to see impacts of things like climate change and a whole bunch of other reasons that are driving up fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. Of course, we're a northern climate, so you don't feel those prices as much in the summer, but Canada just cannot make as much those products that people need. So their prices, seeing some price inflation there. Canada Goose is Canada Goose luxury retail's next high flyer. It's a great article here from the one and only Steve Dennis, who'll be live on the stage at Store 2019. So as I said in one of my comments to Steve, you're learning how to speak Canadian and getting into the Canadian market. Of course, it's no secret to Canadians and Canadian retailers the strength of Canada Goose, but certainly they're getting attention internationally, well-deserved attention, of course. Let's see. One thing I'd call out on May 9th, great opportunity. I'm a big fan of these Leaders in Retail Breakfast series, and now the concept is going to Vancouver. So if you're in Vancouver, you're listening to me on the West Coast, Daryl Jones is going to be sitting down, chitting and chatting. Daryl's president of Save On Foods, a wonderful leader, great merchant, and he'll be talking exclusively with vendors and suppliers about their strategy. So I love these leaders in retail, and this is, I think, the first time it's gone out to Vancouver. Recently was done in Montreal with Eric Laflèche from Metro, and in Toronto with Mike Medline from Sobeys. So they're really popular because it allows retailers to speak directly to their suppliers. Not that they don't do that every day, but it is an opportune chance for a lot of people to hear from the very top level executives. So be sure and check that out. You can find more information on retailcouncil.org. Moving on to international stories. There's a whole bunch of different things, of course, going on. Bed Bath & Beyond closing 40 stores, the headline, but this from CNN. But pull back the curtain a little bit and you find it's actually opening 15. So some of this is just the resetting of the fleet. The company has 1,024 stores. So, it's not unusual for a store to close 40, open 15. So for a net, as lease expires. Generally in the U.S. particularly, retailers remain overstored. So it's not surprising to see. And in fact, other article in here from Forbes, more stores have closed so far in 2019 than all of 2018. So what? Some ask. So in other words, we know that there's a reset going on, particularly in the U.S., where there's just too many stores. So they're resetting. That being said, if you do the pluses and minuses of all the math, they probably will net out to be neutral, if not positive or slightly negative from the ones that are opening up. So watch out for those headlines that always talk about stores closing, but are a little thin on details or kind of bury the lead, so to speak, on the stores that are opening. So keep an eye out for that. Retail news for entrepreneurs. This is our section where we talk about independent retailers, wonderful independent retailers. Keep in mind Canadian Independent Bookstore Day. You heard Kaylee from RCC talking about that in our last episode. That's coming up April 27th. Opportunity to support your local independent bookstore. You've got a couple articles here in bookstores. Again, this from Retail This Week. And we've got stores. It is an interesting article. Brains behind Skip the Dishes launch subscription furniture service in Winnipeg, Saskatchewan. So the two founders of Skip the Dishes, who subsequently sold it, have started a furniture rental business. Interesting. IKEA's getting into some of that. We heard IKEA talking about that today a little bit at RCC's Retail Marketing Conference and here in Toronto. But interesting, these two have launched a service that both assembles and disassembles. It's called Pivot Furniture. So check that out. And you'll notice in that article from the Globe and Mail, Andrew, who was interviewed in our last episode, talking for all the way from Vancouver, previous episode, is quoted bringing his insights as well. So do check that out. And Chueka, who is quoted in that article. So do check that out. What else we got? In Unified Retail Commerce, interesting article here. Again, just following up on some of the comments that Marc Fortin made about the Quebec market. Quebec Mayor Valérie Plante made a pitch Friday for merchants to stick to French when greeting customers. So there's some kind of examination of bonjour, hi, and really she'd like them to just eliminate the hi or hello and just start with bonjour. So, digging into the meaty issues there in the Montreal market. Good luck, Marc Fortin, for continuing to work at the municipal and provincial level in the province of Quebec. What other things? Oh, Best Buy. Great article here on Best Buy from IT World Canada. Continuing to thrive through an e-commerce revolution. Interesting things happen at Best Buy. Their leader, Jolie, stepped aside, and they're going to be looking for a new CEO. He's done a wonderful job, really, of transforming Best Buy, who many thought would be left behind, but has really become a forerunner, and the same in Canada as well. And this article about Best Buy Canada just talks about with Thierry Sabarin, who's a fantastic leader, leads their e-commerce. In this, he talks about, I think the stores are one of our primary assets. So you really continue to see this narrative narrative or insight that stores and online channels, we've talked about this many times, are really a distinction without a difference. And you continue to see that now in the thought leadership from leading retailers such as Thierry. So be sure and check that out. And that's a wrap on this edition of The Voice of Retail. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. You can also ask your favorite home devices, Amazon Echo, Google Home, to play The Voice of Retail podcast. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of M.E. LeBlanc Company, and you can learn more about me on meleblanc.co or on LinkedIn, of course. Join me again next week for a feature interview with the one and only Tony Chapman as he expands on his latest article, Mind Your P's But Own Your Bees. And Peter Van Stock, CEO of Spud, based in Vancouver, tells us all about the three pillars of his business and how sustainability is at the core of everything he does. Until then, have a great week.